What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, man? How are you?
Chillin', man, as per usual. But before we get started, let me be the first to say congratulations, man.
Well, thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. For those wondering what he's congratulating me about, I tied the knot, or I didn't tie the knot.
Not yet.
I took myself off the market forever. I proposed to my girlfriend, so now I guess she is my fiance.
That's what
right?
That's what they call those. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So tell me, how'd you do it?
So if you would like to know, I did quite. You know, it's so funny going through this process of proposing and getting engaged and like planning all the theatrics around that, as far as getting in a ring and then planning like a party and then informing friends and stuff like that. It's a lot of deceit is involved in that.
Yeah, a lot. It's like you start your marriage with on a bed of lies.
It's predicated on a lie. So I took her over to Brooklyn Bridge Park, and I made up a story about, hey, we're going to go hang out with my buddy Dan. Not you, Danny. I have another friend named Dan. And it's his birthday, and we're going to go meet up with him and his girlfriend, his fiance, excuse me. And we're going to meet up with his parents and some other people that you may not know. And, I just kind of made up a story and added some minor details to make it more believable. It was like, we're going to a weird restaurant afterwards. So, dressed a little bit nicer. So we went there, and my buddy.
Wait. Did you tell her to get her nails did?
No, I did not. But strangely enough, she did get her nails done the day prior. I don't know if she just had like an inkling that I was about to do it.
Well, she was going to go to a nice little thing.
She did some suspicious things, but I definitely was not covering my tracks that well, because I was scrubbing our home. I was scrubbing it. I was cleaning our walls because her family was going to come back and surprise us when we got back to our place.
Right.
So like scrubbing our walls, cleaning, mopping, just going the extra mile as far as cleaning. But to go back to the actual proposal, so we planned it at Brooklyn Bridge Park that has a great view of FiDi, a really good view of like the World Trade Center and all that beautiful skyline down there. And my friends are posted up like they're FBI agents spying on Martin Luther King or something like that, and they're just like pop up, and then I have to grab my ring that I got. And the funny thing is, and this is what people are making fun of me, I had the corniest engagement line of all time.
Oh, I gotta hear this.
And to give you some backstory, the way I asked my fiance out the first time, we were seeing each other for maybe about 2 months or 3 months or so, and my buddy introduced her as my girlfriend, and then we had never spoken about that. We never went steady officially.
Right.
So one day I was like, hey, I've been kind of. She's like, why did your friend's dad call me your girlfriend? And I was like, well, I'll be completely honest. I've been referring to you as my girlfriend to other people. And she's like, oh, does that mean that we're dating? And I said, yeah, I think. And that's how I asked her to start dating me. But then, so I did a play on that. I've been, hey, I kind of been telling people that you're my fiance.
Aww.
Yeah, so a little bit of a cute kind of backstory, inside joke type thing. I think I nailed it. But yeah, it was great. I could not be happier as far as how everything went and as what we're doing. And, I definitely found the love of my life. And it's just been an amazing week, to be completely honest. I couldn't be happier.
Well, ladies, you lost your chance. He's off the market now.
And just to go back to the deceit levels of getting a, it's all just like, she said there was about a 50% chance she knew that I was about to propose to her. A 50% chance. I've been kind of organizing this for the past like 4 months or so, as far as gathering her friends together and all of that stuff. I'm like widely texting her friends in plain view. I don't know how she didn't find out. She probably did find out. I also, a lot of couples I've discovered through this process, they actually get their rings together. They'll find a jeweler together, and the girl will essentially just pick out the ring, and the guy will just pay for it,
buy it at some juncture.
And then they'll be like, all right, we'll pick a day to surprise me. And then he picks a random day to give her that ring and all of that. But I took the liberty of doing everything myself. I just got what she liked from her mom, and then I went out and bought it myself, which, caused a whole another level of secrecy, as far as like going out to the jeweler, like lying to her when I was seeing the jeweler. But yeah, a lot of deceit. Funny thing, in my engagement pictures, there's a nude man in the background.
What? Like a fully naked guy?
Yes. So there's a nude man hanging out in sunbathing in the park.
That's
with
awesome.
His ass out in a thong. So that guy will be part of my life for the rest of eternity.
Right.
This nude man. And that's it. But I'm looking forward to the planning of the wedding. It will be a Long Island wedding, and Long Island weddings are stressful.
Well, I hope I'm not too presumptuous in saying, but I'm looking forward to it. I am invited, am I?
You will be invited.
Nice.
You're not invited to marry us. I know that you are a Reverend Danny.
Minister.
Reverend Danny Abdel-Jabbar. But no, we're doing it at the church.
I might still show up in a Link costume. Just saying.
You can dress however you want.
Cool.
After I check with Al and ask her what the dress code is. But other than that, once we figure out the dress code, you can organize or wear whatever you want.
Black tie and Hyrulean shield.
If you guys are interested, I will keep you updated on this wedding planning process, because I'm sure it will be pretty entertaining, because I'm not the best at planning events.
Before we get off this subject, and maybe to segue into what we're going to talk about today, maybe the reason why your fiance suspected that you were, probably going to propose to her was because she got a leak. Do you think that maybe somebody that you were communicating with might have slipped?
I don't know. It could have. Most girls I talk to, and I ask them, like, hey, did you know that you were going to get proposed to that day? They're like, yeah, I knew. And sometimes they say their friends or family told them that was going to happen in advance. Or they just kind of sniffed and kind of followed the trail. But I don't think anyone betrayed me and betrayed my confidence in this process. So
maybe there was a leaker,
so.
man.
If anything, she knew. She kind of knew what was going on, because I was just so damn obvious about everything, as far as like cleaning and all that stuff. And,
yeah.
I mean, not that I don't clean, but I was doing like, I was cleaning as if I was like, it was my job, basically. But yeah, I guess back to your segue to the leaks. So I want to first talk about this, because it kind of relates to what we're going to speak about, and that is Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. But recently, a former intelligence analyst, he was just sentenced to prison for a drone program leak. Did you hear about this?
I didn't actually. Tell me about it.
So, it basically this guy, I'm just reading from this Guardian article. So, a former Air Force intelligence analyst was sentenced to 45 months in prison on Tuesday for leaking top secret information about the U.S. government's drone strike program to a journalist. Daniel Hale out of Nashville, Tennessee, has said he was motivated by guilt and a desire for transparency when he disclosed to an investigative reporter details of a military drone program that he believed was indiscriminately killing civilians in Afghanistan far from the battlefield.
Well, that's something.
So this guy came clean. That is something.
You know how they say
when people.
Sorry, you know how they say
go ahead.
the truth will set you free. Well, I guess in this case, the truth got him in jail.
Well, that is the consequence when you decide that you want to spread light or leak information to the public to change policy, because that's usually the motivation for leakers, is that they're leaking information to the public because they either have a guilty conscience or they think that there should be some sort of policy change.
That's right. We learned all about that with our episode on the Pentagon Papers. It's pretty much the exact situation.
Yeah, and Daniel Ellsberg knew very well that he was going to go. He was probably going to serve life in prison. He was lucky that he didn't go to jail.
Right.
He didn't go to prison or didn't serve life in prison just because of Nixon's shenanigans, making it just like kind of a circus trial.
Mm-hmm.
As far as burglarizing him and allegedly trying to assassinate him and then trying to bribe the judge. Obviously, it's his Nixon kind of screwed himself. But I mean, that's good because I think it's great that Daniel Ellsberg is not rotting in prison right now.
Right. And he's been an activist for this for
90 in his 90s.
Exactly. And he's still an activist too. But he's still kicking. Listen to that episode. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. And there have been people in the national security state leaking documents since forever. And major newspapers have been publishing them. So in the case of Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers, that's the New York Times and the Washington Post. And it's hard it kind of like the line, what people are trying to figure out now is what's the difference between WikiLeaks and the New York Times when they publish classified materials or classified documents. Is there a difference? Do you think there's a difference?
Maybe. We'll see.
Well, according to New York Times legal team, they don't see the difference. That essentially prosecuting Julian Assange for leaking classified information, that basically gives a right to really put anyone in jail, either the leaky or the leaker. Leaky or the leaker.
Yeah. I mean,
which is scary, which is a very scary precedent if you decide to be a whistleblower.
It's very much so a scary precedent. I think, there's certain components of Assange's story specifically that I think warrant some conversation, particularly in his motivations to get some of the documents and in his methods in order to get them. I think many of those arguments are weak in comparison to the overall judgment that, as you pointed out, New York Times' legal team sees no legal difference between. But
their columnists do. Their columnists are very anti-Assange, but their legal team, their legal analysts are like, there's really no difference between what we do and what he does.
Right.
And it sets up the precedent that if they can do this to Assange, they can do this to any reporter with any type of classified secret
or any publication.
So that's the real
or anything
threat,
like that, right?
As far as freedom of speech and as far as your First Amendment rights and just transparency among people, among the public. And I kind of want to outline, the difference of, what they are and why it was revolutionary when they started doing what they were doing. What WikiLeaks was and is it's a website that's dedicated to spilling the secrets of the powerful. So it's a place that was encouraging the leaks of original documents and just wanted to post them online for other journalists to go ahead and just, take it from there.
Right.
So, they're just setting up a secure file drop, so somebody from the inside can drop that, can leak that document and then give that to the press to actually, spin that and, bring that to the people. And, this was an invention that there was a market for, because in 2006, when the WikiLeaks org domain name was registered in Iceland, we're talking about the height of the Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
And no shit, there were crimes going on. But WikiLeaks established this portal for people inside government or big business or whatever power structure to make a difference.
Right. I mean, journalists, military, intelligence, and many others uploaded tons of information to WikiLeaks and, still do to today. And WikiLeaks has uncovered lots of shit. So corruption, crimes, financial things, government, human rights abuses, and so on and so forth. And I think especially after having that episode on the Pentagon Papers, someone like Ellsberg, who was literally photocopying all of those documents one by one, like this is something that, I think he would have appreciated if he had access to it in the time that he was doing his leaking and his work. So yeah, very revolutionary, this website in terms of being able to expose the truth here.
And, that prospect of such a website, I really think has brought out everyone's true colors. So as far as Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, government, big business, and also the legacy media, which has really led the pack in denouncing WikiLeaks, because I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think it's the number one reason is because they challenge their role as gatekeepers of information.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason is, I think, when journalists or legacy media types or journalists look at Julian Assange, they're kind of looking at everything that they're not. They're just spin artists for the most part. Like members of the corporate press are there to really spread an agenda rather to inform people.
So what was the first documents they ended up publishing? Because I think this might be important to just kind of set the stage here.
Yeah, so they published a lot of stuff. So the first thing they ever published was something on this Somali leader who was planning on assassinating government officials. And then they followed that up by exposing how the president of Kenya was basically just like looting the country and using the country as his bank account. They had some stuff on like the Cayman Islands, like the banks there,
like the offshore banks. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they did something on like this far right British National Party where they exposed like the membership list there. They had this stuff on Peruvia where they basically leaked these phone conversations between like government officials, politicians, and like lobbyists, like talking about like just enriching themselves. There was
before you move on from that, I just want to point out that the country in question is Peru, not Peruvia. I can already see people leaving one-star review.
I said Peruvian.
Peruvia isn't even a country.
I said Peruvian. That's politicians, right?
I'm pretty sure I heard you say Peruvia.
Oh, all right. Well, whatever. You all know what I mean.
The country of Peruvia.
Sometimes I just say shit wrong. It is what it is. It's called history for a reason.
Yeah, right.
but yeah, they also did a copy on. They had a copy of the protocol manual for soldiers stationed at Guantanamo Bay. They even had Sarah Palin's Yahoo email. So someone hacked her email, and they leaked some of these emails. I'm not even sure really what they exposed with Sarah Palin at the time. I think she was talking to some. I'm not exactly sure, but that was like one of their big, one of the first things they were known for. So stuff like that. There was another thing with like Icelandic banks, like fraudulent activity there.
Mm-hmm.
But basically what he did is that he set up this system where people could anonymously upload these original files, and the contract was that you publish these, or you upload these files, and then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to vet them and release them. As long as they're newsworthy, and if they're correct.
Right.
So you can't post revenge stuff on your ex-girlfriend or something like that. It's like, as long as it's
there's a different
newsworthy
website for that one,
and it's challenging some type of power structure, whether that be big business, politics, or anything like that, then they'll publish it.
Right. Well, I think that's a really good backstory, but all of those stories, while they're all in their own respect, pretty big news, I think it wasn't until 2010, so 4 years into them being a thing, that they really get some notoriety. So they blew up in 2010 in the news because they started publishing a series of leaks that was provided by U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning. Among those leaks provided by Manning, and trust me, there were a lot. I think the most damning ones were about the Baghdad Airstrike, so collateral murder video, the Afghanistan War Logs, and the Iraq War Logs. And I want to talk about a few of those now, because they are pretty nuts. So this first one, the Baghdad Airstrike, or collateral murder as it was titled, this is a leaked footage, so video footage of an airstrike that was conducted by a team of two U.S. Apache helicopters and I'm gonna butcher this
in East Baghdad.
City name,
it was in East Baghdad. You don't have to pronounce the neighborhood.
East
it was
Baghdad.
In East Baghdad.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, it was like a horrifying. It was a horrifying video that was basically just a slaughter of civilians, which included two journalists from Reuters.
Right. So it's 39 minutes of gun sight footage, and as you pointed out, it shows the crew of these helicopters just opening fire on a group of men, and they killed many of them. And it was later confirmed that all of them were civilians, including, as you pointed out, the two Reuters journalists, and both journalists died from this. And collateral damage is definitely an unfortunate reality of war. But I think what made this particular video and this particular incident very heinous was that the video actually shows the U.S. soldiers laughing about it, like it was a game or something. Like they were having fun, just gunning down these obviously unarmed people. And then it shows them in a second strike, opening fire on this van driver who happened to drive by and went to help some victims. It was just, I don't know, man. It was disgusting.
Yeah, the video.
Disgusting.
Yeah, the video showed U.S. pilots gunning down civilians in cold blood, and it's what motivated. It was one of the reasons why Bradley, now Chelsea Manning, was leaked this to WikiLeaks, because the Washington Post, or David Finkel from the Washington Post, he actually had access to this video, but he didn't say what really happened, and he refused to publish it on the Washington Post. And
the gatekeeper,
he was like, "Man, why aren't you saying this is not what happened? You're not saying, you're not explaining the full story." So that was one of the motivating factors, among other things. But, one of the bigger scandals there as well, I mean, just besides the cold blood murder, is that this took place in East Baghdad. And just for context on the war in Iraq at that time, is that this is the Shia section of Baghdad fighting against Muqtada al-Sadr, who was one of the legs of the Shia United Alliance that we put in charge after Saddam Hussein. So essentially what we were doing is fighting against the people that the U.S. was fighting for in the war.
Or with.
And you're right. You can watch this video, and I mean, I don't recommend watching it, or maybe you're into that type of thing, but these guys are murdering and just having a lot of fun doing it. And then this civilian comes out and they kill this guy too. It's pretty shocking. And then one of the other reasons why she was encouraged, or why she did this, was Chelsea Manning was, I think, in Iraq. She was in charge of booking people and then sending them off to jail to basically be tortured. So she was indirectly participating in the torture program.
She was an accessory to torture.
Yeah. And one of the guys that was arrested for writing a newspaper article called "Where Did the Money Go?" And where did the money go? Because it's about, just corrupt financial dealings. All the money that we were pumping into Iraq during the war, all that just went into the pockets of defense contractors and corrupt Iraqi politicians. The money didn't go anywhere. Right. There's billions and billions of dollars that are being pumped into Iraq, and no one's seen a dime of it. So this guy wrote an article, a news article saying, where did the money go? Because the Iraqi politicians were stealing the money. And then Manning brought this up to his commanding officer, and she was told to shut up and get back to work, basically. And that's when another one of the reasons why he took his stuff to WikiLeaks,
right? Because
the combination of these reasons, I'm sure she had other reasons as well, but I mean, that wasn't the only thing. So yeah, you mentioned that the Afghan War Logs, right? Or no?
Right. And this one is particularly poignant, I guess, for current events, because we're, as per our last episode here, we're pulling out of Afghanistan, after 20 years now. And, in the news story and in the, episode that we were doing about it, we point out how, we didn't win this war, and that it was grossly reported in terms of the violence and the chaos that ensued, and how unwinnable it was. And the Afghan War Logs, or I think they also call it the Afghan War Diary, was basically this massive dump by Manning of internal U.S. military logs of the war in Afghanistan, and it was, at the time at least, it was considered to be one of the largest military leaks in U.S. history. It contained a shit ton of documents. It was over 90,000 reports and war documents, and that spanned between 2004 and 2009, which isn't even the full length of the entire war. So you can imagine how much more shit there's probably flying around. And before, what's interesting about this particular leak is that before they released it publicly, WikiLeaks actually provided this to 3 major publications, which I thought was a pretty smart move, by getting them, to have that information first before they put it out to the public so that they can vet it. And they were able to confirm the authenticity. And the 3 publications that they sent it to was The Guardian, New York Times, and Der Spiegel. And this is thousands of pages that I'm boiling down to just a couple of sentences here, but these documents obviously showed a gruesome picture of the death counts and the violence in this particular war, and there were, in particular, there was many hundreds of incidents that went unreported of civilian casualties. So probably very much like the the Baghdad attack, there was similar situations happening in Afghanistan where they just weren't officially reporting them, but there were internal reports that were going around about him that just never made the light of day. It also showed a huge surge in these Taliban attacks against coalition forces, which was also undocumented officially, and in some cases even classified. And that kind of reminds me of, the Pentagon Papers and how, Ellsberg was basically showing how, they were actually losing the fight in many cases, and that they weren't making ground. So very, very similar to the Pentagon Papers in that respect. And I think it painted just a much different picture of the war than what, was being officially released and officially, circulated in the media. And yeah, I mean, it exposed the truth about how the war was going. And again, this happened, pretty much in the height of it in 2010. This is 10 years, halfway through it, right at the midpoint. So it was a pretty big dump.
Yeah, and then that was followed up by the Iraq War Logs.
Right. And remember how I said that the, Afghan War Logs were the biggest leak in U.S. military history? Well, this one blew the lid off of that one. So it was like a back-to-back record setter. In many regards, it was very much the same as the Afghanistan War Logs, just a different country and a much bigger leak. There was, from this particular dump, something like 400,000 U.S. Army reports that were involved in this. And the key takeaway, or at least one of them, was that it showed 66,000 civilian deaths out of 109,000 recorded deaths, which is a ridiculous, that is an absolutely ridiculous proportion of civilian deaths to deaths in particular. And again, this wasn't for the whole war. It's just for the period of 2004 to 2009. It's just the madness of killing of civilians is just outstanding from this particular leak. Just madness.
And everyone knew this was, well,
I think most people suspected it, or at least some people suspected, like, hey, are we, should we be here? We're talking about 2010 here, right? Like, we were already very much war fatigued at this point. Nobody expected to be in either of those wars for this long. Everyone, but by all accounts, they were, initially when we were propped up to go into Afghanistan and eventually Iraq, they were just like, oh, it'll be a quick walk in the park, maybe a couple weeks of major offensive and a few extra months of cleanup and shit like that. And then that turned into a couple years, and then a couple years very quickly turned into a decade. And at this point it's 2010, and they're like, hey, I think by that point, most people were, if you weren't questioning the validity of those wars, I think you were willfully, putting your head in the sand about it, so to speak. And at this juncture, this just confirmed those suspicions for a lot of people. And the fact that they were vetted and, authenticated by 3 major publications is, kind of helped with, its validity.
And it wasn't just that; it was also the State Department cables, which
I forgot about that.
Which was basically just U.S. diplomatic cables that had been sent from its consulates and embassies all around the world. I guess to put this into context, like how big these are, and how many reports and how much journalists, like how many independent stories were written, just based off the files and documents that were in these diplomatic cables. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of files. If you just if you do a Boolean search in Google and you say State Department cable confirm, State Department cables confirm, you will see thousands of pages of different Google results with different stories. Like, that's how much these papers just changed
certainly fed a lot of journalists.
They fed a lot of journalists, but that's how many stories were created from these papers or from these documents that they were uploaded. Just type in State Department cables confirm or State Department cables reveal, and you will find just thousands of different articles on just different stories. And, there's all these sorts of scandals being exposed, like torture, massacres, lying about casualties, like you mentioned, just political pressures in both of those wars. And then she revealed, everyone who was being held in Guantanamo Bay, which was a secret at the time. And, that included, just like horrible abuses too. And then there was kids in there, basically as young as 14 years old. And then there was also people who were 89. So you had
like senior citizens,
extreme ends of both age spectrums. You have a child, a 14-year-old as a child. I guess a child can, they say, well, 14-year-old can pick up a gun and, strap a bomb to him, And an 89-year-old, an 89-year-old in Guantanamo Bay. And then, the military arrests her and court-martials her. And, she's charged with mainly the collateral murder video, or leaking the collateral murder video to WikiLeaks. And she's put in solitary confinement and humiliated and tortured, like made to be slept naked and stuff like that, just treated brutally. And the narrative is that Manning and Assange, and pretty much anyone else who ever leaks anything or is thinking about leaking anything or thinking about providing classified information to the public, what they're doing is that they're putting the CIA in danger. They're going to put spies in danger if they release these documents. And you're also going to get soldiers killed if you reveal classified information. Like, you're doing this selfishly. You have no idea what you're doing. You are putting our troops on the line, and there's going to be consequences because of your reckless abandonment for, this sensitive information that no one else can see except, the anointed ones that we elect. And this wasn't true. It was never shown that anyone was murdered or assassinated or killed because of these leaks. There's no evidence to ever point to anyone was killed or murdered because of any of the leaks, any of these major leaks, between the Iraq War Logs, the Afghan War Logs, and then the State Department cables. There was nothing like that was ever brought into it. There's no evidence to suggest anything like that. The other argument against it is that, hey, you release these files, you're preventing us from doing diplomacy. Like, you're undercutting our ability to negotiate with other countries and to make deals with other countries. And you're also, it's kind of strange that they're just targeting democratic institutions. Like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? And those are the major arguments against, leaking this information, which is just what?
It's insane, dude. Like I was watching this documentary on this topic, not too long before we started this episode, just to kind of jumpstart and see some of this stuff. And Leon Panetta, former CIA guy, Secretary of Defense, was on. He was one of the interviewees, and honestly, like, I was just kind of disgusted in his tone. And maybe the editors on this documentary just did a clever job at editing in parts of what he was saying on the interview in a way that was maybe unflattering to him to align with their narrative. But you were talking about like that there were consequences to leaking these things. Well, what are the consequences of these Apache pilots just gunning down civilians in cold blood for fun, and laughing about it? Like, where are the consequences there? Where are the consequences for their, commanding officers that ordered the strike? And so I think
and just to add that,
these,
as far as consequences, I'm sorry to jump in, but
no, you're good.
As far as consequences, not only just consequences for the people committing war crimes, but that's creating that type of behavior on the battlefield is creating more danger for other soldiers there. Because if you're massacring people, if you're slaughtering people, if you're doing brutal acts, the only thing you're going to be doing is creating a more spiteful and vengeful insurgency to fight you.
Right.
So
that's right.
You are creating.
That's right. So I just find these types of arguments to be like in a vacuum by itself. I understand what they're saying, right? Because like if you do, as an example, if WikiLeaks were to have leaked the names and locations of spies all over the world, then yeah, that would put them in danger, right? But as far as I've read, they've never leaked that type of information. And as you pointed out, nobody's ever been proven to be like murdered or killed or anything like that because of these leaks. So, if we're talking about ends justifying the means here, so far, WikiLeaks hasn't done any harm, and the U.S. military has done quite a bit of harm. But, the U.S. government is trying to make this argument, like sweep this major atrocity, even if we just take the one example of this, of this collateral damage video. And like, I didn't hear Leon Panetta even make a single comment in that whole thing. And maybe he did, and they just edited it out. But like, I haven't heard anyone in the government say like, yeah, that was bad, or like acknowledge like that was probably wrong. And we should look into that and we should investigate that. But you shouldn't leak documents. Like, that's never the argument. The argument is always deflection and gaslighting on the issue. And that just makes me kind of upset, because, two wrongs don't make a right for sure, but damn, that one wrong is much bigger than the other one. Like, I don't know how else to explain that, like it's fucked up.
It's kind of funny. This is not funny, but if you go back to George H.W. Bush, during the Iran-Iraq war, the U.S. shot down an Iranian commercial airliner and killed a bunch of civilians. So about 200 Iranian civilians boarding this commercial airliner. And
yeah, this is like the Iranian rally cry against the
U.S. And
it
was a mistake. And George Bush was the senior. Is like, I'll never apologize for the United States, which obviously it's not going to sit well with people after you shoot down a commercial airline full of their countrymen. But so this is kind of like unrelated, but it's one of those stories of how I kind of one of those. I didn't have like some massive shift. How some people are like, they can go back to like that one moment where like they changed their opinions on stuff. Because I used to be very raw America, fuck yeah, da-da-da, coming now to save a motherfucking day now. I used to be very much like that when I was younger. And I think most people my age growing up at that time, right after September 11th and, kind of seeing the bombs being dropped during the Iraq war, you were like, whoa, this is kind of cool to see these bombs go off and all this stuff. Is like our soldiers are kicking ass.
Or at least it was justified in a certain way.
It was justified. But that was my mentality when I was in high school. Didn't really know it. I didn't know anything about the Middle East, or anything about global politics or just anything in general as a teenager, as most teenagers don't know anything. But I do remember I was in a car with my friend, and we were like listening to the radio, and there was like a report that the U.S. accidentally bombed a hospital. And my friend was just like, oops. But then we looked, and then it was funny. We were laughing, and then we were like, that's really messed up. This is terrible. Like, what are we like, this is just awful. And I remember being kind of we weren't laughing at the suffering. We were laughing at like just the absurdity of the presence there, and how we say we're liberating these people, and then we just bombed the hospital. Like, that was kind of like, it was like a very dark laughter. And I was like, yeah, like I'm laughing because it's just the absurdity of it. And that's when it kind of hit me. That must have been around like, I think it was around the time of like when ISIS invaded Iraq. And I was like, man, that's when I really, really started shifting my thinking, or at least a moment when I can kind of recognize as a pivot. But obviously it was a very gradual pivot that took many years to really change my mind on these things. But just to go back to Assange and why there's a lack of support for him, especially in the U.S. and the U.K., was mainly because of the rape investigation in Sweden. So, in August of 2010, Swedish prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Assange based off one woman's allegation of rape and then another allegation of molestation.
Right. I think the story is that he was sleeping with both of them without a condom, and later both women learned about each other and that they were both sleeping with Assange, and they ended up going to the cops to see if they can have him take an HIV test. And from there, things kind of spiraled out of control. And then that kind of spurred on the international arrest warrant that was placed against him. But initially, the allegation of rape and molestation, that wasn't the initial allegation. At least this is what's documented. And if you ask Assange, of course, he says it was all consensual, and I frankly don't know who to believe here. I mean, just because he made a platform to disperse truth doesn't mean that he is beyond reproach, or that he he's that we shouldn't scrutinize people for wrongdoing. So I'm struggling a little bit with this particular point. It's entirely possible that he did rape somebody.
Well, this is probably what Assange defenders struggle with the most, and understandably so. Obviously, you don't want to defend a rapist, but obviously the simple argument for Assange supporters is that he denied it, first of all, and it's unproven allegations, which he has since denied. And it's very hard to believe an unproven allegation about a known target of U.S. intelligence agencies. The warrant was withdrawn shortly afterwards with prosecutors basically said they didn't have enough evidence for rape allegations. And it was a different prosecutor after that reopened that rape investigation, and she wanted to charge him with what the Swedes call minor rape. So minor, what the hell is minor rape? There's minor rape, what if you call something minor murder? Not minor as in someone not of age, a less severe rape. This is the reason why Assange leaves from Sweden to Britain.
Right. And actually at the time he stuck around in Sweden to be interrogated. I think he was interrogated 2 or 3 times by different investigators. And he waited around for 5 weeks for, allegedly, he waited around for a follow-up that never happened. He was just waiting for the next step. So he left to London. And that's what got him in a lot of trouble because, of course, Assange, he's not dumb. He's also maybe a little bit conspiracy minded, but I think, not for good reason. He had his ideas that the warrant that they put out there was a pretext for extradition. So he went to London and he went to the Ecuadorian embassy and he applied for asylum there. And at the very least, the Ecuadorian assembly agreed with his suspicions that all of this was bullshit and it was a pretext to get him extradited to the U.S. for so that they can charge him with some crime of leaking espionage or some shit like that. And he ended up staying there for 7 years. Spoiler alert.
Well, I think everyone knows that at this point. But while he's in Britain, that's when the Iraq War Logs and the diplomatic cables are released. But I want to talk about some of the consequences of these leaks, specifically, some of the consequences of the State Department cables. So the Arab Spring, Ben Ali of Tunisia was a notorious thief and corrupt dictator who was just looting the country. And the ambassadors were, they detailed all and they documented all of Ben Ali's corruption. So when this stirred up in the Tunisian media, you had Mohammed Bouazizi. I can't pronounce his last name. Bouazizi. Bouazizi. I'm not going to butcher it anymore, but the guy who was he was like a PhD candidate who the Tunisian economy collapsed, which led to him basically being a fruit vendor on the street.
Oh, the fruit vendor guy. I remember him. And then they try to shake him down.
So basically,
and, take his fruits.
So the police came and they shook him down for not having the right permit to sell fruit on the street. And in protest, he went over and he filed, a complaint at, the local police station, and they didn't do anything. So he goes back and he lights himself on fire in protest, just like how the Buddhist monks did to the South Vietnamese government. It's like, I don't want to say it's a common form of protest, but it's an extreme form of protest that has been done before in the past. There was a young man in Gaza who did that, protesting the Israeli government. It's something that has happened before. And once this guy kills himself in this very theatrical way, riots break out, which lead to Ben Ali and his wife being exiled to Saudi Arabia. And, they what was uncovered was that Ben Ali's wife, her family, was basically just completely looting looting the country, just oligarchy looting, stealing, and they go to Saudi Arabia with like gold bullion and gold bars in their plane. They become the government of Tunisia station. No, but then they're the one. Tunisia is like the one government or one Arab country that doesn't end up completely screwed through a horrible civil war after the Arab Spring. Because then Egypt said, "Oh, how about that?" And they went and they overthrew their puppet dictator Hosni Mubarak. And of course, they end up having elections, and the Muslim Brotherhood wins. And then in response to the Muslim Brotherhood winning, which wasn't surprising at all, the American coup said, "Hey, you voted for the wrong person." So, they
Right.
end up installing Fatah al-Sisi, who's basically just Mubarak's clone. And this also led to the revolutions in Libya and Syria, which were basically just subverted by, the quote-unquote free world to, remove Gaddafi and eventually, try to remove Bashir al-Assad from power.
That's right.
Another thing to come out of the WikiLeaks was, this is like another massive consequence, was so WikiLeaks released that these U.S. soldiers handcuffed and executed some women and children during a 2006 raid. And they killed the baby at point blank range. And then what these guys did is that they called an airstrike to destroy all the evidence. And this was the same time when Obama was trying to renegotiate with Iraq to keep American troops there. And then when the news came out in Iraq that confirmed these brutal murders of this poor family, and then they try to cover it up like the LAPD, that this created the political will or political cover, at least, for al-Maliki to say, "Hey, we can't do this. You have to go. I don't have any type of political backing to negotiate your continued stay and presence in Iraq right now. We can't renew this contract after this horror story." And that got the U.S. kicked out of Iraq. until ISIS caused another war, thus calling for America again. ISIS, aka Obama's freedom fighters, caused another war. Another leak was the April Glaspy memo. So we've talked about this a lot in other episodes, but as ambassador to Iraq for George Bush Sr., she basically gave the green light to Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait. Because, the story of why Saddam invaded Kuwait was that after the Iranian-Iraq war, both these countries were trying to rebuild. They were both in terrible debt. So OPEC came out with like a plan to drive up the price of oil so that Iraq could, use that extra revenue to rebuild their country. And then Kuwait was overproducing. They were overproducing oil, driving the price down. And Iraq was like, what the fuck? And they were also, Saddam Hussein was accusing Kuwait of slant drilling and, drilling oil that was technically under Iraq's territory. And when Saddam Hussein was talking to April Glaspy, the ambassador to Iraq, she said, well, we don't really care what happens here. Like, we're not really concerned about these border disputes between Arab countries. And, George H.W. Bush said the same thing. He's like, yeah, what do we care about? What do we care about Kuwait? Like, Kuwait has never been an American interest ever. In our entire history before 1990, when was Kuwait as part of like any type of American sphere of influence or concern? It was always a British. It was always like a quasi British colony. Like, it was always a British interest. It always like who gave it? Who the U.S. didn't give a fuck. And then that's like the story that we always joke about comes with Margaret Thatcher and convincing George Bush, hey, one day George H.W. Bush says, we don't really care what's going on in that world. And then the next day, after a couple days with Margaret Thatcher, he comes out and he's like, he's Hitler, he's Hitler, he's Hitler. So another story was when Obama thwarted a Spanish court from prosecuting Cheney and Rumsfeld for war crimes, because I guess under I don't really understand the exact precedent or how a Spanish court or a court from another country charges two political leaders, or what's the legal process of that. But I know Obama went to Spain and said, hey, you better cut this out or we're going to cause problems for you. There was in the leaks, they discovered that the U.S. encouraged the coup in Honduras in 2009. Man, there were so many things that were discovered that were leaked through WikiLeaks that, it's really impossible to keep track of all of them.
All right. Well, at this point, I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the elements of Julian Assange's what I'd like to call imprisonment in the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK, because obviously we've went through at length all of the things that WikiLeaks have done and all of the implications, all the geopolitical things, ranging from deposing dictators, Arab Spring, exposing corruption, you name it, right? Like, so I think we kind of beat the dead horse here. I think the reality of this is, since we're talking about Julian Assange, is I think we should be talking a little bit about the conditions that he's been put under as a result of doing what at least some people would consider a service to humanity, by, exposing these things. Of course, if you're on the other side of this argument and you think that it is dangerous, to expose it, I think you should still take a look at the ways that, that he's being subjected to almost an inordinate amount of repercussion as a result of this. And I want to start by saying that, earlier on, we talked about how he was alleged to have, raped somebody or sexual misconduct, and that case got dropped due to insufficient evidence. And then it got picked up again by a different prosecutor. The whole process was a little fucked up. Julian Assange obviously had his suspicions that this was a pretext for extradition to the U.S. because as a, from pressure from the U.S., spoiler alert, he ended up being kind of correct about that. But, he ends up going to Ecuador. Well, I guess it's technically Ecuador. He went to London, and he went to the Ecuadorian embassy. The government of Ecuador, the president there was sympathetic to him and to his, request for asylum, right? Exactly. For his request to asylum, they accepted him, and he went into the Ecuadorian embassy, and at that point he was trapped. That was a dead end, right? Because as far as embassies go around the world, wherever there's an embassy, that embassy is technically foreign soil, right? That if we have an embassy in, anywhere in London, let's say, that complex, that building is technically American soil. And so in the same way, the Ecuadorian embassy in Britain is Ecuadorian soil. So the British government has no legal right to, go in there and, do like a SWAT mission and scoop up Julian Assange and arrest him based on this international arrest warrant that was given to him from the Swedes. So he's safe-ish in there, but this is a small building, and I'm not very familiar with London. I've only ever been in the airport, but I hear it's a lot like New York in the sense that a lot of the buildings are older and they're not necessarily very spacious. It's not very commodious, if you will. And so the building wasn't necessarily equipped to have a full-time guest, right? Even the some of the ambassadors that were talking about it on this documentary I watched were saying that, they didn't have a bedroom. They didn't have like a full kitchen, it wasn't properly zoned, if you will, for somebody to live there. Definitely not for 7 years. And so, the spaces that he was living in was very, very confined. In a lot of ways, he was restricted in the types of people that, come visit him. And in the beginning, he was kind of a rock star, I think, dropping all this information. There were so many people that went and saw him, from politicians to celebrities, and to activists, you name it. They were going in and out in the early time. But as time went on, they started kind of cracking down on his visitation rights, if you will. And for everyone out there that's listening to this show who's experienced at least some form of lockdown due to coronavirus, you can kind of get the sense for, what it does to a human being's mental health and even physical health in many cases when you're confined to, an indoor area. So obviously lack of vitamin D is a big problem. That's, when you're not getting enough sunlight. Lack of exercise because he couldn't go outside to run around or even do very much. And then, of course, the human interaction. That lack of human interaction really does take a toll on a person. And, a lot of us had a lot of heartburn in the last year about lockdowns. And, it caused global, conversation about, the government's power to restrict your mobility and things like that, even in the face of, a very dangerous epidemic. For Julian Assange, there wasn't a coronavirus for 7 years for him. It was just that he leaked a bunch of shit, and now he had to hide in this Ecuadorian embassy for a very long time, right? So, like, if you
it wasn't a coronavirus, is that police set up round-the-clock guards to arrest him if you stepped outside.
That's correct, in a show of force. And they even had him, in the back doors, posted at all the windows. They were watching him all the time. So if he ever stepped foot outside, they were going to get him. And they have legal recourse to do so, right? From a legal standpoint, there was an arrest warrant for him. He was a high profile criminal, at least according to this arrest warrant. He had fled his bail conditions, right? And the bail conditions said that he couldn't leave. And by going to London, by going to the Ecuadorian embassy, he had basically, he was a flight risk, right? And so things really start getting bad for him when the Ecuadorian government awards a contract to a company called UC Global or UCS Global, I forget exactly. It was a small security firm. It was headed up by a former Ecuadorian soldier. His name was David Morales. And, go figure. It's like, I don't know the specifics around how the hell it was that this small, tiny little company was able to score such a important or big, contract, especially for Ecuador. Not knocking Ecuador, but like they were housing, probably arguably one of the most wanted men, on the planet at the time, in their embassy, and they were contracted to do security work for them, up to and including all of the video surveillance that was already on site before Julian Assange took up asylum there, but they definitely stepped this up. So they installed a shit ton of cameras, more than they already had, higher quality ones. And that was just fine by itself. I think it's for the protection not only of the embassy, but also, for Julian Assange's protection. Like if one day, the British government decided to do a sting operation and like, go in there, now they'd have the evidence, like good high quality evidence of something like that. But it was for everyone's safety, and I think everyone agreed to it at first, but then they started doing some weird shit that was just like not cool. As an example, they started installing these cameras that had internal microphones. So they were starting to tape and record all of the conversations that we're having. And there weren't many places that they didn't put these microphones. Like the entire building was bugged. So all the conversations that he was having, including ones with his lawyer, who would eventually become his fiance and mother of his 2 children, and with his other lawyer from Spain, and also, he was still running WikiLeaks out of the Ecuadorian building, so they were keeping tabs on him. So there was this article that I pulled up from Computer Weekly. It was pretty good, so I'll read a few things from that. So 2 former staff of UC Global have claimed in an anonymous witness statements that the company's founder supplied surveillance footage and audio recordings to, quote, American friends, which were passed on to the CIA. And then moving on a little bit, the former UC Global operations manager said staff collected information about the visitors of Assange, following orders from the National Intelligence Secretariat of Ecuador, Senain. So to unpack that a little bit, they were David Morales' company, UC Global, headed by David Morales. He was giving them direct orders to spy on Julian Assange. And he was gathering that information and he was encrypting it and passing it along, allegedly, to his, quote, American friends. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And they used this in coordination with his eventual arrest. And I'll talk more about that in a moment too. So just hold on to that for a second. So there's this person, Melinda Taylor, who was a lawyer. I'm reading again. Melinda Taylor, a lawyer specializing in human rights and international criminal law, who visited Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, is due to testify 13th November. This was last year. And according to court documents, UC Global allegedly recorded the meetings between Taylor, the lawyer, and Assange's partner, who's also a lawyer, Stella Morris. 4 audio tracks in WAV format of more than 12 hours in length were allegedly found on the computers of UC Global during the judicial investigations. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. They had hours worth of privileged conversations between the lawyers of Julian Assange and Julian Assange. there are legal ramifications. You're not supposed to do that. And I know that they're running the security contracts for this, but this is, if anyone's able to have those recordings, it's the government of Ecuador, not some private company. That shouldn't be, that shouldn't be on your hard drives. That shouldn't be there. So it's already fishy. Okay, so according to court documents, the recordings were made by magnetic microphones attached to one of the fire extinguishers. Okay, now this is getting really wild, right? So they were putting bugs in there for ostensibly no other purpose but to spy on Julian Assange. Like the cameras, maybe like you can make an argument that it's for everyone's safety. Cameras with audio, again, pushing it a bit, but sure, but literally putting hidden audio recording devices in the rooms, that shows to me, and this is just my take from this, that shows intent, like intent to surveil illegally at that. A document presented by Assange's lawyers before the National Court on January 16th states a folder with the name Stefania Maurizi Objetos que Porta Carpeta was found on UC Global's computers, and it contained 18 JPEG photographs of the electronic devices that the journalist carried on one of her visits to Assange were stored, including 3 mobile phones, 2 digital recorders, several phone chargers, and 21 USB sticks. Photographs show that UC Global workers disassembled one of Maurizi's mobile phones to remove the SIM card and photograph its serial number and the phone's IMEI code. Okay, I'm going to break that down because that's super geeky. One thing that this UC Global company, the one that was contracted to do the security here, started doing is they started cracking down on who can come in. And one of the policies that they had was that you had to surrender your personal electronic devices at the door before you can enter. And so they would surrender their mobile phones and their recording things and stuff like that. And the one part where it says there were pictures on UC Global's computer of this journalist's phone, her personal phone. And that doesn't seem super harmful, right? Except when you read the part where they open up the phone, they remove the SIM card, take a picture of the SIM card, its serial number, and the phone's IMEI code. Why is this important? Why? Because if you have the SIM card serial number and the phone's IMEI, you can now start tracking the activity that phone is having. So we're extending now beyond the reach of just inside of this facility. Now they have the means to say all of these phone records coming from this particular SIM are related to this particular person. And, she is just a journalist, so she has nothing to do with Julian Assange other than she's writing a story. So they're really pushing the boundaries here on what should be morally or even legally permissible to do. And there was a whole court case that Assange, had set up against this particular company because, frankly, it's very clear that they were spying on him. Now, the twist here, and this is a pretty big twist, is that there is a connection to through a couple of third parties to Trump. So as you know, when Trump was on the campaign trail, campaigning against Hillary Clinton, you might remember a couple of moments where he was like, I love WikiLeaks because they were like posting all this shit about Hillary Clinton's emails and all this other stuff, and it obviously was helping him in his race. And when he gets elected, ultimately, they kind of change his tone, right? He's saying, "Oh, I don't really know WikiLeaks, whatever," and actually, he gets much more aggressive. The U.S. government gets much more aggressive in pursuing Julian Assange. And how do we get to Trump from Julian Assange? Well, this guy, David Morales, the owner of UC Global, he starts going to Las Vegas very frequently. Initially, he's saying that he had a contract with the Venetian Hotel, which is one of the bigger, more elegant ones on the Las Vegas Strip. And he's going to Venetian Hotel like a couple times a year, very frequently. And while he's in the Venetian Hotel, he's sending these emails, according to the court documents that were published in the case against them, that was having the chat records that he was having with his team, was that, hey, I need the documents for, today's visitor log, or, hey, I need the videos for, today between this hour and this hour. And he's asking for all this information coming out of there. We don't really know why. Nothing is proven yet. But I will say that the Venetian Hotel is owned by Sheldon Adelson. And Sheldon Adelson is a very big, or was, did he die? I forget. Is he dead?
He's dead now, thank goodness.
He's dead. So Sheldon Adelson was one of the biggest Republican donors and huge connections with Trump, arguably one of the reasons why he might have won, right? Because he funded the damn thing.
Well, he funded more so the Republicans running.
Yeah.
He's a big Republican donor. I think he provided Trump with like $500 million, but it was mainly
just a paltry $500 million sum.
It was mainly he was funding like other Republicans running for Senate and Congress. He's a terrible person.
Right. And so the allegation here is
was a terrible person, thank goodness.
The allegation here is that the U.S. government, vis-a-vis the Trump administration, vis-a-vis Sheldon Adelson, vis-a-vis this guy, the head of UC Global, was using this influence that they had and all this intelligence that they were getting, such that they were able to spy on Julian Assange and listen into all of his conversations and figure out what he was doing and what he was going to leak and all this other stuff. And they're building this case against him. And I think the culminating point here is that at one point, the Ecuadorian government had awarded Julian Assange they had awarded him citizenship, right? So he became an Ecuadorian citizen through this process. But they also, at one point, awarded him diplomat status. And the thing about that is that if you're a diplomat, you can kind of, with immunity, move freely, through London. And the plan was that he was going to, he had all of his documentations that he was a diplomat.
Diplomatic immunity.
Exactly. So he had all the documentations that he needed. He was planning, to have like a diplomatic car pull up and pick him up, drive him to a private airport, fly on a private plane and go to Ecuador, right? That was the plan. And they were plotting this plan for a while, and they were planning on doing it on December 25th, right? So Christmas, because they thought, everybody's going to be like busy with Christmas, and it'll be less noisy and stuff like that. So that's when they're going to do it. And I mean, ultimately, they knew about it, and they found out that. Julian Assange he basically got shook. He was getting this indication that he was going to be arrested if he left, even with the diplomatic immunity. So he decided not to. Ultimately, flash forward a couple years, they're still surveilling him. And there's allegedly this information is going to the United States intelligence agencies. And, on the day that he gets arrested, it's kind of a long story, but, the original president of Ecuador, who was supportive of Julian Assange, had resigned. And then there was this new president, and this new president had wanted to make closer ties with the United States. So they started adopting a less friendly, position towards Julian Assange. And then, of course, not to completely absolve Julian Assange of anything. Apparently he was, being a really bad tenant, and, who can blame him after several years of basically isolation in one place? He was probably losing his mind, according to, his family and friends. He was in not a great mental state. So he probably was a piece of shit, like a bad roommate at that point. So all these things culminated to, the embassy saying, all right, fuck it. we're letting the British go ahead and come in and arrest him. That's fine. And so British come in, they go and arrest him, and literally on the same day, they go ahead. The U.S. starts its extradition papers. It's not a coincidence, man. It's like they knew they knew that Ecuador was about to do that. They were about.
Oh
to
yeah,
blow,
of course.
blow the doors
of
open.
course they knew.
You know, they knew.
Of course they knew.
They knew everything.
They had the indictment all planned.
Right. They're already ready to go.
They were already. They were 100% ready to go. So it's getting super hot in here. So I don't know how much I can handle podcasting anymore. Feels like it's 98 degrees in here. I'm drenched in sweat.
Sorry.
However, there's one more thing that I think we should bring up, and then I don't know, put a pin in it, and then we could talk more Julian Assange stuff. We were talking about this probably about a month ago, not on the podcast in private, but one of the key witnesses against Assange, he admitted to this Icelandic media newspaper or publication that he lied about his indictment, about his testimony. Mm-hmm. And then they went deeper into it, and it turns out this guy is just like a fraudster, criminal, pedophile who, no, I'm like real, like
not even
for
joking.
real, like who was already arrested for abusing about like 8 young boys, and the FBI basically recruited him to testify against Assange, saying that they would, he would get a better sentence. Like, I don't understand how that judge and how that British judge doesn't throw that case out at this point. Like, how do you not throw that case out?
Well, I mean,
what is even the purpose like anymore to, you already put, if you want to prove a point that like, yeah, don't
fuck
reveal
with us.
Government crimes. Yeah. I don't even get the purpose of throwing him in jail anymore, prosecuting him. Like, you tortured this guy for a decade. I think, isn't point made already that if you decide to stand up against the empire and create some platform that's against our interest, you're going to be tortured for at least a decade? Wasn't the point made already? Like, what is the? It's just such a relentless pursuit on this guy.
Well, I mean, at least one judge throughout the extradition. It was in January. A lower court actually denied the U.S. extradition. But a month ago, the higher court,
because the U.S. prisons are so bad,
right? And a month ago, the higher court, approved. Well, not approved, but they took up the case again. So we'll see what happens there. But right now, he's in a supermax prison in the UK, and also to make things worse, he was in this supermax prison for the coronavirus. So they stopped him from getting any visitors for something like 5 straight months. So he was in total isolation from everyone and everything, on top of everything. So, but I guess maybe he's used to it because, he did 7 years in the embassy in Ecuador. So,
all right, let's what are we talking about right now? Let's end this podcast.
Okay.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Bro History. It is one of those summer nights where it is so hot while recording this. It feels like it's about 100 degrees, and we were having audio problems all day. So it's going to take a lot of work to get this episode out.
So we hope you appreciate it.
We will get this episode out. But thanks for listening. We really do appreciate the time and support. If you want to support the show, rate and review the podcast. That is the number one way to support the show, is rating and reviewing it. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/brohistory. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Peace, guys.
Peace.